Fast-moving forklifts and tight spaces create risk. Collision Awareness builds motion sensing safety systems for high-risk areas like blind corners, loading docks, and overhead openings. With flashing LED alerts and real-time detection, their systems help protect workers and equipment before a potential collision happens. Check them out at collisionawareness.com. American-made, ocean-aligned, and trusted by facilities nationwide. That's collisionawareness.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by the CEO of Vecna Robotics, who is Karl Iagnemma, and he has recently joined within the last year. And we're going to get the latest on what's going on with Vecna Robotics. We haven't had them on the show for quite some time now, so we're going to get an update on that. We're going to hear a little bit about his background and how he's bringing that to Vecna and warehouse automation. We're also going to talk a little bit about their case flow solution, which is targeting case picking. So very interested to dive into this and hear the latest with Vecna. So Karl, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, Kevin. Glad to join you today.
Definitely. Happy to get you on. Happy to get an update on Vecna as well. As I mentioned there in the intro, it's been a little bit, but you recently joined as well. So congratulations. And I'm not on the team, but I'll say welcome to the team anyway. But for people that are not familiar, why don't you give us kind of a brief overview of Vecna Robotics?
Yeah, sure. So Vecna is a startup, about a 6-year-old startup at this point. Vecna is focused on transforming warehouses and manufacturing facilities by orchestrating AI-driven robots and human workers. So it's not just a robotics company, it's an orchestration business and as much of a software company as it is a hardware company. We are moving palletized loads in warehouses with kind of the standard tools that you see when you walk into a warehouse today. These are forklifts, pallet jacks, tuggers. The difference, of course, in the Vecna system, these are fully automated. So these are fully autonomous robots. We work with really a kind of a who's who of top global manufacturers, distributors, 3PLs, and we're moving thousands and thousands of palletized loads every day with a spotless, and I mean, totally spotless safety record. The real difference from a Vecna perspective, from my perspective, is the software. So we've got great hardware, but the software is what really differentiates us. It's what gives the robots the intelligence to perform very complex workflows, on the facility floor. But it's also what allows us to orchestrate and optimize across the entire system. So not just a single robot, but it's a system of robots working together and working with, the humans in the facility as well. And doing that through integration, of course, with the WMS. So this is an AI-powered cloud-based software solution that we offer as well. And then the last thing that we do, which I think is quite unique, we offer 24/7 support. So our robots, when they get confused, if there's a blockage in the facility, if there's something unexpected happen, as there's always something unexpected happening. You've got a person who can go in and give the robot guidance. This is a person sitting remotely, of course, but they can look in to see what the robot is seeing and give that robot guidance. So you continue to make progress. What you don't have and what you don't want in a warehouse is robots sitting idle. So that's a summary of the Vecna solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, and that's the Pivotal software, right?
That's right. Pivotal.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so we've talked about that on the podcast before. And I think, very, very powerful to be able to power those robotics and do that orchestration like you talked about. And I've been up there to the Vecna headquarters before a couple years ago, so I'm sure a lot has changed since then. But remember seeing the kind of the support there on the ground for for anything that may be an exception, right? Which I think is a great backup to have there. So I'm curious, you recently joined Vecna, and you're coming to Vecna with a lot of experience in driverless vehicles, right? Outside of the warehouse, right?
Yep.
So now you're coming inside the warehouse and inside the four walls, I guess. So tell us a little bit about, kind of your experience with driverless vehicles and how that is kind of now translating over to autonomous vehicles within the warehouse environment.
Yeah. My background is in technology. I'm a technologist and in robotics in particular. So, my background academically, I did a PhD at MIT in robotics. And then I stayed at MIT for about a dozen years. I was directing a research lab called the Robotic Mobility Group. And as the name, might suggest, these were we were doing research on mobile robotics of different scales, small scale robots. We did research for NASA for robots for lunar and Mars exploration. That was a lot of fun. We actually had some software that flew to Mars. We did a lot of research for the Army and Department of Defense because they were, an early adopter of autonomous robots for obvious reasons. You want to take the humans out of harm's way.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of research into off-road navigation of mobile robotics. I eventually left MIT to form a startup called Nutonomy. That was one of the first venture-backed startups focused on fully driverless cars, so robotic taxis, basically. And we grew that business to, through some twists and turns, acquisition and joint venture formation to eventually over 1,000 headcount. We raised almost $3 billion in capital by the time things were said and done. And the robotic, the robotaxi space is actually very similar, believe it or not, to the AMR space in a warehouse.
Really interesting.
When you have a robotaxi on a public road, the technology that's powering that robotaxi is quite similar to what's powering an autonomous forklift. It's what we call a sense, plan, act architecture. The robot's looking out at the world. In the case of a robotaxi, it's seeing where the traffic lights are and where the pedestrians are, et cetera. In the case of a forklift, obviously, you're primarily looking for other pieces of material handling equipment and human workers, et cetera. But you're perceiving the world, you're planning what to do, where you should navigate, and then you're acting on it. You're sending actual drive commands to your motors. And so from a technical perspective, very similar. I was excited to join Vecna, from the autonomous driving space, because I'm just a huge believer both in the business and in the industry. This is an industry, I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's an inevitable industry. That's how I would characterize it. I mean, we know that automation will increasingly penetrate the warehouse space because it's the right thing to do. These are jobs that are difficult to find human workers for. The labor cost is expensive. These can be dangerous jobs, and automation, it just solves so many of those pain points. So I know the tech. It's kind of in my DNA. I love the space. I knew the business. This is a business. I'm here in Boston. This is a Boston-based business. So I've known Daniel Theobald, the founder of Vecna, for many years. And so it was a great, kind of an easy transition and a great transition. So yeah, I've been here about 6 months, and so far so good.
Nice. Yeah. And I think, obviously a ton of experience there on the robotic side and autonomous side. And, I think, like you said, it certainly is inevitable, right? That I think this automation and robotics is going to be coming into the warehouse. I mean, it's in many warehouses already, but there's still a huge way to go to get really full penetration and market adoption. But, I think that, like you said, there's a lot of these tasks and things that are happening in the warehouse that people just don't want to do at the end of the day, like to make it very simple. And one of those things certainly has been like case picking too, right? Which is like repetitive, heavy lifting, maybe not the most ergonomic thing to do. So you're trying to tackle that, right? And I think it's very interesting. Last year I remember specifically talking to a lot of different companies, and the big thing they're trying to solve for is case picking. So you have this case flow solution. So tell us a little bit about that and what that's all about.
Yeah, I mean, the motivation, you put your finger on it. Look, case picking today is primarily manual in many, brownfield sites, and it requires a ton of labor, because really what it is, it's a lot of people spending a lot of time walking around. I mean, these are huge facilities, as you know, hundreds of thousands to millions of square feet. And the first time I saw it, to me looked like grocery shopping. It's like what I do at the grocery store. I'm pretty inefficient.
Yeah.
When I need a can of tomatoes, I'm going to go through every aisle to find that one can of tomatoes. And then when I need something else, I'll go back through all the aisles. And so what I noticed first off is that you have a lot of people spending a lot of time just walking around. And that is not high value work, of course. I will tell you, though, it is exhausting work. We looked at some of the data that we captured when we were studying the problem. We looked at the step counts of the pickers. And my first reaction was like, guys, this can't be right. Like, this is ridiculous. These individuals cannot be walking this many miles per day because it's totally unsustainable. And the answer I got was, yeah, it's unsustainable. That's why there's so much turnover for these picking activities. So we wanted to solve this problem. And the team has spent about the past 2 years developing CaseFlow. So predating me, I'm not going to take much credit for this one at all. But they wanted to find a solution that would work for brownfield sites that would not require a very large CapEx investment, because frankly, that's not where a lot of the customers are. They're not in the position to make multi-million dollar CapEx investments and wait many, many years to see a return. So brownfield sites, reasonable investment with a fast return on investment, significant reduction in labor force. That was another key point, is that, look, it's got to take out a lot of that labor cost. Otherwise, really, what are we doing here? It can't be an incremental change, but it's got to work with the workers that will be there. It's got to be a great system with a great interface that workers want to work with. So this ended up being a collaborative human robot system. All right. What CaseFlow is, it's a fleet of automated pallet jacks. So these kind of lighter weight, more nimble, agile material handling robots, a fleet of automated pallet jacks that augment a small fleet of human pickers. So picture walking into a warehouse and seeing today a fully manual case pick activity where you might have a dozen pickers doing the picking task on a daily basis. Yeah. With CaseFlow, we can go from a dozen pickers down to 3 or 4, and then we augment them with a fleet of relatively low cost, nimble, agile, autonomous robots. And the system, and it truly is a system, the robots are working with the pickers. And I say that, the pickers are wearing a wearable device, which is giving them instructions on what to do and where to be and when. So they will be picking from a location. And when they're picking from that location, there's a robot there to meet them and accept that package. And then they can move on to, a short distance away, pick to another robot and pick to another order. So it's a zone picking architecture, but it's a flexible zone picking architecture. You've got pickers that aren't stuck in a single zone all day. These zones can move, but they're picking to multiple orders simultaneously. So the net result is you have the human workers who are spending more of their time doing the high value work, which is the picking, and much less of their time walking around, which is the low value part of it. The picking part, I refer to that as the high value part because, there's complexity in building a pallet. You've got to this is where we use our human ingenuity and strength, right? We're going to take a case, we're going to put it in the right spot, we're going to build a stable pallet. And all of that takes some reasoning. You're kind of solving that Jenga problem in real time. So that was the plan. That's what the team executed on. We launched CaseFlow late last year, kind of, I would say, the official launch, press release launch. We really unveiled it, I would say, at ProMat recently. Yeah. And, the response has been quite overwhelming. It's the results we've seen with our customers. I mean, really, that's all that matters, right? We can talk a good game, but what we've seen with our customers so far, essentially double productivity per worker, 2x improvement in productivity. And we've reduced labor count by about 70%. So, it's just an enormous win. And you couple that with a very attractive ROI. The human workers are walking, far shorter distances on a daily basis. Right. So we've actually seen much less worker turnover at our customer sites. And as you know, turnover, what it really leads to is just costs in terms of recruiting and training. So there's some hidden kind of ROI there. So it has been enormously well accepted, and we're hugely optimistic about it. We truly believe that we have the industry's best solution to this brownfield case picking problem. And as you pointed out, it is a huge problem. Yeah. So we're very excited about CaseFlow.
Yeah, very interesting. And I love the idea there and the concept too, to kind of take that, case picking where typically you'd be, whether it's walking with a cart or a pallet jack and loading to a pallet and doing all those steps like you mentioned, and essentially making it kind of like a zone pick, I imagine, right? Where
Mhm.
you have a
Yeah.
picker is responsible for this area and that's it, and they don't have to walk outside of that. And the automated pallet jack is doing that travel time for them and moving that around from area to area. So really interesting there. And I think that it's important to understand too. You mentioned the brownfield solution, right? So, when we talk about brownfield, which is existing facility, versus greenfield, which is a new facility, right? Uh, how important, I guess, was it for Vecna, or is it for Vecna, to be able to solve for both? Because it sounds like obviously if it's a solution that's good for brownfield, it certainly would be good for greenfield too. But how important is it to be able to address like that segment of the market
Mhm.
that can't necessarily just go out and get a new building for the sake
Yeah.
of automating, right?
Yeah. Look, my view, the world is brownfield,
Yeah.
right? This is where most of our customers are. And certainly, look, there are other solutions for case pick, but these are
Mm,
typically more capital intensive, kind of disruptive,
mm,
only greenfield. So if you're going to build out with an ASRS type approach, you have to have the ability to make that build out. So a new facility, typically, not always, but typically, you have to have the sort of business that can make that scale of capital investment and can have kind of the patience to see it through from an investment perspective in terms of time. A lot of our customers, we work with 3PLs, and it's a little bit of a different landscape in certain regards. They may have a customer contract, a multi-year contract, but maybe it's a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract to distribute goods for a particular customer. And so I think it's more difficult in some cases to make those large investments. And so brownfield, look, that's kind of the name of the game. We knew we wanted to focus on brownfield. We knew there'd be an enduring opportunity there. And so what that means is you can't go in with a solution that requires a big tear up.
mhm.
As you know, as well as I, the customers in this space, they are loath to make significant changes to their facility and to their workflows.
Yeah.
What they, I was going to say want, but really what they require is solutions that can plug into their existing facilities and workflows, ideally without changing anything at all.
Mhm.
And so that was the goal. And that's what I think we've really achieved. Again, what we ask is that the workers really put on a wearable. And this is a very convenient device because it's a screen, it's a wearable, it tells them, again, what to do, what tasks to do, and when, and they can interface with it, of course, for exception handling and things like that. But you've got the robots that are doing natural feature-based navigation. We're not putting in lines in the floor, of course, or even
Mhm.
fiducials or anything like that. They're navigating based on their sensor-based perception. And you've got the orchestration software. Pivotal, as you mentioned, is powering the coordination, the orchestration between the human workers and the robot, and adapting in real time to any changes that might occur. If there's an exception due to some stock error, if there's there's a spill and you need to do rerouting, it's doing all of that on the fly. Again, there's no infrastructure required there. So we try to adapt to the practical reality of our customers. And overwhelmingly, we find that that's going to be the best opportunity for us. There are certainly applications for more expensive, complex, and more significant investment, for higher automation levels in case pick. This is not that. This is what we feel will address that very large middle range, that 80% that want something they can plug in today, get a quick return on investment, and not massively disrupt their operation.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such a big win for those operations, because any disruption, right, or any, inkling of we have to like stop for deployment or something is certainly like a pause for a lot of operations, right? Well, we can't stop, right? Picking, we
Yeah.
can't stop shipping, right? We have to keep going. We can't have that kind of disruption. So the fact that you're able to kind of just plug that into their existing infrastructure, it sounds like, and their kind of workflow, and just improve the existing workflow, I think is a big win there. So I guess from an infrastructure perspective, is there any change that needs to happen at all?
Integration with Wi-Fi.
Mhm.
There's always an IT dimension, and we're
Sure.
integrating with the WMS. But other than that, it's mostly dropping our robots in, doing a mapping activity, which is relatively quick and efficient, and then kind of, tuning things up and letting it go. Again, it's natural. It's kind of natural feature-based navigation. That was also, I know, a foundational principle for Vecna from the very beginning, that you don't want to have to make changes to the environment in order to simply navigate, know where the robots are, et cetera. So we've honed that over the years. The robots are very, very good today of being dropped into a facility, figuring out where they are, understanding what they need to do, and go and do it. And the last thing is, the equipment that we use at Vecna, this one is, I think, is really important and something I loved when I joined the company. Again, I won't take any credit for it, but if you see a Vecna robot, it's going to look very similar to a manual piece of material handling equipment. And that is very much by design for two reasons. One is, quite frankly, cost. If you build something bespoke from the ground up, your design, you, Kevin, you're going to build your own automated forklift. It's going to look beautiful and sexy and unique, no question, but it's not going to look familiar to the workers. It's not going to look like the equipment that they have trained on. It may not even have manual controls, so you can't just jump in or hop on and grab a tiller and move the robot if you need to. But all of that is actually very important. So to me, there's kind of two dimensions of wins in using and obviously modifying these kind of standard manual pieces of material handling equipment. One, we save on cost because we're bootstrapping off of our vendors, our partners, our forklift manufacturers, their existing volume, right? And number two, it's familiar to workers, and they can operate it in manual mode very easily, kind of trivially, no training required for that, right? Because they're already comfortable with that type of system.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And I think that's a great point there, is because it kind of makes me think of some of the humanoid discussion a little bit, where people are like, well, why does it need to look like a human, right? I guess in a sense. But that familiarity, I think, is a great call out there, and a great thing to point out, because, if it is different, right, then it becomes, I think it increases the level of change management potentially that needs to happen there, or the way the mindset of the worker needs to shift to, now I'm looking at something different. Is it distracting to me? Is it something that is very unfamiliar? I'm not sure how to navigate around it, even though maybe it's doing the same exact thing. It just looks totally different. But I think that's a really great point about that familiarity, and great to highlight too, kind of that hybrid approach too, that you can jump on and also go into manual mode to operate these two. So I'm curious, you mentioned in the beginning very much that, Vecna is just as much as kind of a software company as also a robotics company. So you've been in the robotics world for a long time now. You have a lot of experience with that. So I'm curious your thoughts on, the importance of the software side of robotics as much as the physical aspect, the physical device, tool, whatever you want to call it. How important is it to understand the software that's driving the robotics or automation for people that are, exploring this and looking at different options?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Spoiler alert, your team hates manual unloading. And who can blame them? It's slow, risky, and exhausting. Tawi's container unloader eliminates the pain. Lifting loads safely and efficiently from inside containers. Engineered to lift heavy goods ergonomically from deep inside containers, it accelerates unloading while keeping your team safe from strain. Safer workers, faster turnaround, and better efficiency. Better for your people, better for your bottom line. Lift smarter. Visit Tawi.com today. That's TAWI.com.
Yeah, well, it's extremely important, and I'll be kind of very blunt here. The software is really where the value is created. It really is, certainly for the specific tasks that Vecna is doing, but I think even beyond. I know you can find use cases where you could make a counter argument, and maybe humanoids is one, but humanoids are not going to be in warehouses for the foreseeable future. Let's just be honest about that. But for what we're doing, the hardware, look, it's an essential component, right? Again, if you've got certain specs, you can lift 3,000 pounds versus 2,000 versus 4,000. That matters to a customer, of course. But that's really just the sufficient condition. For me, the hardware part is about optimizing for cost and maximizing performance. Let's get the most we can out of this device, but let's build it as cheaply as we can so that we can offer the customer a great ROI. But the software is what determines the capabilities of the system and the efficiency of the operation, right? There's both the software on the robot, which allows it to autonomously navigate, and then there's the software in the cloud, which is coordinating all the activities of a fleet of robots. And both are extremely important, right? The on-robot software distinguishes between kind of a dumb robot and a really smart one. And the difference of that is just efficiency and time. What we see with some of our competitors, I get asked the question, well, boy, there's a lot of autonomous forklifts out there, right? I went to ProMat and I saw half a dozen of them. Like, what's the difference? And this it's not something you can see at a ProMat when everything's just static, but when you see our robot in a facility, and when we talk to our customers who have done bake-offs against our competitors, the big difference is Vecna robots are smarter, meaning they can do exception handling better. They can do more complex workflows. They can do obstacle avoidance more quickly and easily. And it's not intelligence for its intelligence sake. It translates into efficiency. We can do a particular task more quickly, complete that task and move on to the next one. Let's get more work done. And ultimately, of course, that's the name of the game. So that's the on-robot software. But that's not really enough, right? Because if you had a fleet, now think of a fleet of robots, 10 robots, 20, 100. If they were all intelligent, but independently intelligent, what you might run into is issues with congestion. You might run into situations where two robots are trying to tackle the same task at the same time. And so you will have fleet-wide inefficiencies. So the fleet coordination, the orchestration is also, incredibly important. And we've got software that is in real time, on a high frequency basis, every several seconds is re-optimizing what the activities of the fleet of robots are doing, tasks as needed, adapting to changes, in the facility, providing data back, right, to get real-time insights into performance for facility management. So all of those things, are hugely value additive in different ways, but that's all software. So from my perspective, if I were to put a number on it, the software part of it is 90% of the value. The hardware part is maybe 10% of the value. And so we as a business, we have hardware engineers, software engineers, of course, but much of our team is focused on software development.
Yeah, and I think that's very important to note, right? Because you had a great point there about, you go to ProMat and you see, multiple different solutions. Some of them look very similar, right? What's the difference there? And I think, that software layer is so critical to what's the actual capability of, this automated forklift or AMR or whatever type of robotic solution it is, and how can it do that, right? So that's a great explanation there. I really appreciate that.
And just to add one more thing, Kevin, this is going to sound kind of weird to put it this way, but what I think about when we do a deployment, when we have a customer that's, we've done a deal with, and we're going to put half a dozen automated forklifts in their facility, fantastic. On day one of that deployment, that is the worst that system will ever perform, right? Again, that sounds like a very much a negative, but what I mean is every month, whenever we're pushing out a new software release, our robots are getting smarter and more efficient, right? So they will continuously improve. That's part of the service that we provide at Vecna. And so the actual work that particular robot can accomplish, it gets better and better each month. And we've seen this in the data. We actually just recently pulled some data. I asked my team, find me some key metrics on performance improvement over the last couple of years. I'd like to see how things have trended. And so we looked at things like average travel speed. We looked at time for an average pick or drop, of a pallet. And what we've seen year over year, consistently over the past several years, typically a 20% improvement, 19 to 20% year over year. So think about this. You got human workers in a facility. They're doing what they do, and people work hard. On average, people are going to do what they're going to do, but they're not going to improve 20% year over year. That doesn't happen. I will tell you what does happen is the costs increase year over year. It doesn't increase 20%, but it might be increasing 3, 4, 5, or 6% year over year. So on the human labor side, your costs are increasing, your productivity is flat. And on the automated side, our costs aren't changing too dramatically, but our productivity is improving 20% year over year over year. So again, speaking to the inevitability part of it, at some point, and I think we're here now, but just the delta between the human performance and the robot performance is so large that it's unignorable. And it translates just into ROI.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really great point there because, certainly, we see more and more the improvement of these solutions over time. And obviously your data shows that too as well. But it's a great point on the human aspect, right? Is that, humans are only so capable, right? And if we want to, rely on humans to do some of these processes, especially in the warehouse, like the only improvements really to move the needle we can find are, either we do some continuous improvement projects, we change the process flow, we add technology, we speed up, the pick path, we slot better, we do all these types of things. But that human at its core, at the base model human, maybe you'll say, right, is only going to get it so good, right? And there's going to be a max point that they're going to be able to hit, even like your best picker, for example, right? I mean, they can only go so high. There's a threshold there. So very interesting point there. So I'm curious to get kind of your view, and I think you've given a little bit here, but I'm curious your view on kind of, I guess, current state of robotics in the warehouse, and where do you think it's kind of heading within the next 2 years?
Yeah. Well, the good news is robots are really pretty good these days. And I say that as someone who was working now in the academic space at MIT, but sort of in the bad old days of robotics. And this was a time when we would have a good idea, a clever thought, navigation algorithm or a perception algorithm. We tested on the robot. And if we could get it to work like 3 out of 10 times, we were thrilled. And that was okay, because that was the name of the game at that point, like existence proofs that this approach might be something useful for someone in the future. That was fine. That was the state of things. But, advances in, machine learning based everything, perception and navigation, I would say, advances in localization and SLAM, the technology has really matured to the point that our robots work very reliably in these challenging environments like warehouses. You touched on it. These are very conservative operating environments, right? They are risk-averse customers. They will not deploy automation until they have a very high degree of confidence that it will work effectively all the time without failure. And that's hard. It's hard for any system, but very hard for robotics. And to be honest, only recently achievable within the past few years. But the good news is things are improving and improving quickly. I pointed at our 20%. And so broadly speaking, AI is what's driving the improvement. Again, there's many different flavors and forms of AI. Kind of the initial excitement, at least for me, was around convolutional neural nets and deep learning based perception algorithms for autonomous vehicles on the roads. That's all trickling into the warehouse. So the AI, what it's doing is allowing the robots themselves to become smarter, that on-robot navigation is more capable. They can do more workflows and do them more quickly and do them more reliably. Fantastic. But for me as a chief executive, I get equally excited about what AI is going to do for our business. And so from a business perspective, some of the things that cost us at Vecna, right? Deployment takes time, and there's cost there, which we would like to minimize. And that support that I mentioned, the 24/7 support, it's a big differentiator for us. We love it. It's also a cost center. We are deploying AI in both of those areas today. We're going to use AI to make the deployments much more efficient, not just a little more efficient, but much more efficient. So we can be deploying in a matter of days or even eventually hours instead of a couple of weeks, and at a much lower cost. Good for the customer, good for Vecna. And then the 24/7 support, again, there's a human in the loop, and that's great because humans are very smart. But if we can do some of those support tasks with an automated agent, that will be a much lower cost solution. We can, again, pass that cost save on to the customer, better ROI. So we're going to be achieving a state driven by AI that's allowing us to provide more value for the customer, right? Better ROI at a lower cost to Vecna, which means a better margin and better business profile for Vecna. So I'm really excited about that. I see a state for us in the coming, and 2 years, maybe that's a little bit of an aggressive horizon, but we are approaching this phase where we will be a robotics, a hardware, software company with software-like margins that are enabled by AI.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see kind of the rapid evolution, rapid advancement that a lot of the recent developments in AI have kind of unlocked, right? And be able to think about things in that way, like as you said, even not only think about how do we leverage AI to make our solution that we're providing to our customers better, but how do we internally also leverage AI to also reduce those costs and make it a more viable solution from cost point as well, to be able to do that. So really interesting to hear from you today, Karl, and learn about kind of what the latest is with Vecna and the case flow solution, and also the importance of the software driving that robot that you see physically, and also kind of what's coming and what to expect from the industry here. So really appreciate you joining me today on the show. Very insightful. And if people want to learn more about Vecna Robotics, what's the best way to do that?
VecnaRobotics.com, and on social media as well. Search for Vecna Robotics, you'll find us.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes here. So, Karl, really appreciate you coming on, and thank you once again for your time on the show.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.